I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, arrest warrants for Gallant and Netanyahu of Israel, along with Hamas's Def and Sinwar. I can't even bear to say it in the same sentence. And The Hague orders Israel to stop its operation in Rafah. About a week ago, the International Criminal Court team announced it was pursuing arrest warrants for Hamas leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, as well as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity over the October 7 attacks on Israel and the subsequent war of defense Israel has been conducting in Gaza. Special prosecutor Karim Khan said that the ICC's prosecution team is also seeking warrants for Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant, as well as two other top Hamas vile monsters, Muhammad al-Masri, the leader of the Al-Qassam brigades, who is better known as Mohammed Def, and Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's political leader. The move against Israel marks the first time the ICC has targeted the top leader of a close ally of the United States. Past such requests included Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, for whom the ICC issued an arrest warrant over the war on Ukraine, and Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, who was facing an arrest warrant from the ICC for alleged crimes against humanity at the time of his capture and murder in October of 2011. A panel of ICC judges will now consider Khan's application for the arrest warrants. Separately, the United Nations International Court of Justice ordered Israel on Friday to immediately hold its military offensive in the southern city of Rafah, but stopped short of ordering a ceasefire. What do all of these legal maneuvers mean, and what impact might these have globally and on Israel? Let's get to the bottom of this with our great friend Arsen Ostrovsky. Arsen, as you all know, is a leading international human rights lawyer and one of the most prominent voices in the pro-Israel community. He currently serves as chair and CEO of the International Legal Forum, the ILF, an Israel-based global network of thousands of lawyers that we need so much from all over the world, leading the fight against anti-Semitism, BDS, and the continuous delegitimization of the Jewish state of Israel. Arsen, it's always great to have you back with us on JBS. How have you been?
Thank you, Shah. It's always terrific to be with you, and looking forward, as always, to talking about a lot of issues that are on our agenda of concern and things, we need to really discuss and obviously let your viewers know the truth about what is happening and what can be done.
There is a lot of confusion, Arsen, when it comes to the legal mumbo-jumbo of who says what to Israel to do and whose authority it is and what. So let's clear the haze a little bit for the sake of our viewers. We have two things here that we're discussing. First of all, we have Karim Khan and the International Criminal Court, and then we have the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Maybe we can start with the International Criminal Court. Can you share a little bit about what exactly happened?
Sure. Look, in The Hague, there are two courts, two international courts, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. And they have two very separate and definitive functions. The International Criminal Court is essentially, it's called the Court of Last Resort. It was created in 2002 in order to end the impunity for the world's worst human rights violators, war criminals that committing such crimes as genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. It was certainly never intended to be applied to these kinds of Orwellian circumstances where a democratic state of Israel is defending itself against a genocidal terrorist group like Hamas. Its sister court, the International Court of Justice, has two functions primarily. One, to adjudicate disputes between countries, between states, but also to review and assess allegations under various UN treaties, such as the Genocide Convention, which is the most widely endorsed, ratified convention in the world, and whether violations have been committed against this convention, which is what South Africa has done when they instituted proceedings against Israel in the Court of Justice at The Hague over the really quite absurd and outrageous charge of genocide. Quite frankly, it's not Israel that ought to be, as you know, on trial here, but Hamas, who are very open and clear about their intentions of committing genocide. And I would add one more, South Africa as well, which is openly endorsing Hamas and Iran in violation of their own obligations under the Genocide Convention. But Shahar would go one more. when we're looking at this, both of these cases and situations, what we are seeing is there's no other way to put it other than a breakdown of the international legal order and the rules-based system. There is no other way to describe this inversion of truth, this subversion of justice, and the weaponization of the law. When you're looking at something like the ICC, when the prosecutor, Karim Khan, dares to elevate the state of Israel and the genocidal terrorists of the group Hamas on the same level, what monstrous absurdity. It is an abomination. It is like comparing Hitler and Churchill or FDR after World War II. Or when you go to the ICJ, when Israel is on trial for genocide, when all we're doing is defending our nation, trying to bring our hostages back against a group that is open, not only in their intention to commit genocide against Israel, but have said that they will do so time and time again until Israel is annihilated. So what we're seeing here is this inability of the international courts to distinguish between democracies like Israel, like America for that matter, and bloodthirsty genocidal terrorist groups like Hamas. And that has enormous ramifications, not only for Israel, but for the US and every single democracy that is fighting terrorism today.
So Arsen, before we touch on the ramifications, let's talk about the two courts. First of all, the International Court of Justice that you indicated. Any state can start a proceeding against any other state. What's the limitation? What brought Israel to that court? Why was Israel compelled? Was it compelled to take part in the proceedings? And explain to us the procedural element of it.
Yes, Israel was compelled because Israel is a signatory to the Genocide Convention. As I said, over 150 countries, I don't know the exact number, are signatories to the convention. By the way, that includes not only Israel, the US, most of the Western world, but it also includes, most absurdly, Russia,
right,
China, North Korea, Venezuela, South Africa, all these wonderful, great bastions of human rights, freedom, and democracy. What happens under the rules of the National Court of Justice is if any country goes to the court and says that another country is guilty or charging them with the act of or commission of genocide, then the court is bound to look into that, review it. And this is what happened here, and why Israel was brought into the proceedings and decided to respond. Now, we also have to bear in mind, when you're looking at this, that whereas the ICC is meant to be an independent court, albeit with very problematic biases and discriminations, the ICJ is actually, it's a political tool. It is a judicial organ of the United Nations. The judges are appointed by the United Nations. And in this case, the presiding judge, if you want to truly understand the level of absurdity, the presiding judge is from Lebanon, a country that does not even recognize Israel's right to exist, and who in his previous role, when he was Lebanon's ambassador to the United Nations, stood there at the UN Assembly and accused Israel already of war crimes, human rights violations, apartheid, and we are meant to believe that this judge can be impartial.
Right, no bias whatsoever there.
Absolutely. But notwithstanding, and I have to tell you now, I still support Israel having gone to The Hague to make its case and to make it forcefully and powerfully, because Israel's case is being made not only to those judges sitting on the bench, but it's being made to everyone, to the world, to see the absurdity of these allegations, and that Israel, like any sovereign nation, is not only going above and beyond its obligations under international humanitarian law and to protect Palestinian civilians, far more so than Hamas, in fact. But it's making this case to the rest of the world. So in that sense, I believe it was important for Israel to be there, to be represented, and to make this case.
So we know that the verdict of the court came with the dissenting opinions of Israeli Chief Justice Aaron Barak and the Ugandan justice. What's the enforceability? So let's say the court says something, the International Court of Justice says something. What's the next step? Is it enforceable? Does Israel have to comply? Is there a way to force Israel's hand to comply?
So there's a couple of ways to look at it. The decisions or the determinations of the court are binding. The issue becomes one of lack of enforceability. The court doesn't have any powers to enforce the decisions. But from Israel's perspective, Israel is saying, you know what, we are not doing anything in violation of the court's determinations or the law for that matter as it is. I'll give you an example. In the decision of the court just the other day, and it was a very problematic decision with some heavily biased perceptions, reliance on the United Nations, including the UN Special Rapporteur, Francesco Albanese, who has a long-standing history of bias.
Long-standing history, yeah.
On figures from UNRWA. On other UN agencies.
UNRWA that's been complicit in Hamas's terror, in whose schools we found, anti-Israel incitement material, Mein Kampf in Arabic highlighted. I mean, seriously.
UNRWA's become an inseparable part of Hamas, and quite frankly, if anyone ought to be on trial here, probably is UNRWA themselves.
Right.
But what the court said, and it was interesting, and this was, there's enough media bias and misinformation, but this was elevated another level. So when the court said, for example, that Israel should halt its operations in Rafah, there was a second part to that paragraph, which essentially said, insofar as it may inflict damage in violation of the Genocide Convention or Israel's obligations under the international law. Now, from Israel's perspective, what that means is that, no, the court didn't say that Israel must halt entirely and unconditionally but its operations, its offensive in Rafah, but only that Israel must conduct these operations in accordance with international law and our obligations under the Genocide Convention, which is what Israel has been doing since day one,
right.
Is doing now, and is continuing to do and to abide by the norms of international humanitarian law in levels unprecedented, quite frankly, in modern warfare.
So, assuming the court says otherwise, and something that Israel is not willing to comply with, is there a way to use the UN mechanism to force Israel to abide by the verdict?
What is possible in those circumstances, and we may see it, in fact, even as soon as tonight, is the possibility to go to the UN Security Council and seek a resolution, a binding resolution, in reference and in support of the ICJ decision. Now, this evening, for example, the UN Security Council will be meeting to discuss the circumstances in the last 48 hours in Rafah. The horrible, horrible tragedy in what happened. And it is almost guaranteed that the Algerians, another great bastion of human rights, as we know, that the resolution they will put will make reference to the ICJ decision. So that is the only way that really it can be enforced, in which case it's a decision whether the United States, Israel's great ally, will act in a principled manner and veto any such resolution that, that compels Israel to do something which we are not able to do. And you know very well that there is no decision of any court, of any international body that will tell Israel to not do everything possible in order to rescue our daughters, in order to rescue every single one of the remaining 125 hostages that are left. No power, no body on earth will tell us to do otherwise.
Right, especially when, like you said, Hamas promised to do it again and again and again. So that's as far as, the United, they might be busy though, Arsen, because to the best of my understanding, they're in the process of having the special assembly in commemoration of the great philosopher and lover of humanity, former Iranian dictator Raisi, who perished in the helicopter crash. So maybe they'll find time in between those commemorations.
Indeed. When it comes to Israel, I can assure you they find the time very fast.
So moving to Karim Khan and the International Criminal Court, let's talk a little bit about what Khan is trying to do. They're asking for a warrant for the arrest of, Israel's leaders and dare to put them on the same level as those vile monsters of Hamas. Are they able to enforce those arrest warrants? Do you think the request will be granted? What's the procedure there?
So at the moment, Karim Khan, the prosecutor, has requested that these warrants be issued. So far, it's against Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, in addition to the Hamas leaders. It's entirely possible that there may be further warrants, by the way, issued at a later time, including against senior IDF officials. What happens now is that as soon as this request has been made, which it has to go to a pre-trial chamber, which is a group of 3 judges who are to make a determination whether to agree to Karim Khan's request, whether to request further information, or whether to deny his request. And honestly, it is almost a guaranteed process that his request will be granted, as it normally is. Of course, it should not be if we're talking about the law, but such are the circumstances here where legal precedent has been cast aside in order for political considerations to take precedence instead. Karim Khan made the most outrageous accusations from war crimes, crimes against humanity, that we're intentionally starving the Palestinians, which is absurd when we've seen over 30,000 tons of food and trucks every single day that are coming in. Really, quite frankly, absurd allegations, weaponizing the very meaning of the law, of the rule of law and international order. In terms of the enforceability here, the court itself cannot enforce these warrants because they have no police power. They can't physically take someone into custody. But what it does mean is that if warrants are issued for the arrest of the Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, any one of the 120 or so countries that are signatories to the Rome Statute, which includes most of Europe, Canada, Australia, these countries would be bound, in theory, in principle, to arrest the Prime Minister and Defense Minister if they were to set foot on the territory of those countries. It also means that some of these leaders may be reluctant to visit Israel. It means that there may be calls for embargoes to prohibit from the supply of weapons and arms to Israel, weapons and arms that are needed to defeat Hamas and to rescue our hostages. It will obviously hamper and impair Israel's ability to carry out diplomacy on an incredibly wide scale. But Shahar, what I don't think is fully appreciated, perhaps it is for many of our friends in America, but not enough, is that this is not only a threat to Israel.
Right.
This is a threat to the United States. This is a threat to every single democracy that is fighting terror. When political considerations are placed above that of the rule of law, when you have the threat of spurious, unfounded, politicized charges being applied against you, every single democracy is at risk. Every single US troop, US soldier, like the Israeli soldiers, like the British soldiers who are out there fighting jihadist terrorism, defending our nations, will be at risk. So we need to stand up and call this out, and not only call it out, but act.
Arsen, we're used to saying that what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews, and what starts with Israel doesn't end with Israel. And what we're seeing here is exactly, as you say, the twisted weaponization of the international legal system that's supposed to be doing good for the benefit of those nefarious rogue members of the international community. And this kind of abuse, if it's permitted against Israel, it will be found in the cases of other nations fighting for what's right and just, because we know that the tactics that's being used by Hamas is not dissimilar to those used by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or any other jihadi or other group that seeks to undermine Western values and democracies. And similar to what we're seeing with Hamas, the abduction of civilians and using them as bargaining chips in the fight against the democracy, what starts in Israel won't end in Israel. We've seen this with suicide bombings and others. Now, you have extensive experience across the world, in Europe and in the US. When it comes to Europe, do you feel, from interacting with colleagues and others, members of parliament, leaders, opinion leaders, do you sense there is an understanding of that danger, or do they confine it to the Israel-Hamas conflict?
Well, I think we need to separate sometimes, certainly when it comes to Europe, the people from the politicians.
Right.
When I look at some of these countries like Norway, like Ireland, like Spain, which have just today, Shahar, just today, formally recognized a Palestinian state.
Yes.
What utter travesty, what utter absurdity of justice.
Right.
All this has done is literally, it has rewarded the murderers and rapists of Hamas with a state. Yahya Sinwar, in his wildest dreams, could never have dreamt of such an Orwellian absurdity where International Criminal Court will be issuing indictments, arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. The Court of Justice in The Hague will be accusing Israel of genocide, or that case will be made by South Africa, and now they will be handed a state on a silver platter. Right. What utter travesty, what utter absurdity and perversion of justice.
Right.
Now, when you talk to the people on the street, I believe they understand, because it doesn't take a genius and it doesn't take a PhD or a professor of law to understand that not only is there no right under law for them to have statehood, but it is a reward to Hamas. It is a reward to the very same butchers and murderers and rapists that committed the atrocities of October 7th.
Well, we remember that Yasser Arafat announced the Palestinian state in 1988, and the truth has to be told also that reality will only change on the ground, and with all due respect, and none is due whatsoever, to Spain, Norway, Ireland and others, their statements mean nothing. They might as well acknowledge the existence of, unicorns in Ramallah. That will be just as valid as a Palestinian state. But the principle, you're absolutely correct, and that kind of twisted logic couldn't even have existed in the mind of a perverse terrorist like Yahya Sinwar. But I want to ask you about the International Legal Forum and your work. You have written extensively about urban warfare, what Israel is doing, proportionality, which has been really educating for anybody who reads it, and I consume them whenever you have the time to come out with them. I want to ask you, what have you done, your global network of lawyers have done under these circumstances, and what kind of call to action do you want to give to people who are listening to you and watching you at this moment? What can we do to help you and to fight this grave injustices?
Sure, thank you, Shahar. Look, I think we need to first of all understand that we are fighting on multiple battlefronts. We have not only the heroic, the brave soldiers of the IDF fighting in Gaza, fighting to rescue our hostages, but we're also fighting a war of narratives, and we're fighting in the legal arena and in the courts. And the legal arena allows us the ability to hold not only the perpetrators, Hamas, accountable, but just as importantly, and to be honest, if not more so, all those that aid, abet, support, and fund them. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We have filed lawsuits against UNRWA, or UNRWA USA, for example, over their support for Hamas. We've filed lawsuits with our partners in the US against crypto company over their support and turning their backs, allowing groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad to fundraise. We recently, with a group of lawyers in our network, also filed against SJP, who you are very familiar with, which has become the campus arm of Hamas today.
Students for Justice in Palestine, right?
Justice, indeed. With what utter irony those words themselves are used. So I think what is imperative here is that we need to not only hold the perpetrators accountable, but all those that support, aid, abet, and fund them. Because if we can hold them accountable, if we can stop that flow of money, we can change the paradigm. And Shahar, we need to make them understand that they cannot get away with this. They cannot turn a blind eye. They cannot continue to funding these atrocities. And that Israel, Jewish communities across the United States, across the world, and all friends of ours who support the rule of law, as I do, who want to see peace, who want to see the destruction of these Hamas terrorist group, and they can understand the difference between democracy like Israel, like the United States, fighting for our existence, and bloodthirsty genocidal terrorist groups. So we are doing this every single day with our network of lawyers, over 4,000 lawyers around the world, in the United States, in Europe and elsewhere, working with partners, working with lawmakers, working with civil society, people who see the truth, people that fight for the truth, and people that want to stand up for Israel, that believe in the rule of law, and that want to make a difference. And with the law, we can.
We can. What would you say? So first of all, for lawyers who are interested in engaging with the International Legal Forum and being part of these efforts, how do they reach you, Arsen? How do they reach the ILF?
They can certainly they can go to our website, ilfngo.org. They can email us at the email address info@ilfngo.org. They can, of course, follow us online on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook as well. They can receive our newsletters. For lawyers, we need all the lawyers we can get now. You said that at the very beginning. This is a very busy time for lawyers, but you know what else? The law is one of those few rare things where we can make a difference, where we can use the law in order to hold the perpetrators and their enablers to account, and we can change the paradigm. So we need all the lawyers that are willing to stand up for Israel, willing to stand up for the truth.
And I guess the same applies for those who are viewing us now and listening to you who are not lawyers but wish to understand more about the topic at hand, spread the news and maybe raise awareness to this important issue, which, like you say justly, is not just an Israeli issue. So I guess they should do the same, visit you on social media or on the website?
Absolutely, Shahar. We are a legal organization. We work with lawyers, but not only for lawyers, because this is a discussion we're having everywhere. We're having these discussions on campuses, in halls of Congress, in the media, in civil society, in churches and synagogues, on the streets. People need to know what are the misconceptions, what are the charges, what are the allegations, and they need to know the truth. They need to know how to respond, and we can certainly help them do that.
Arsen, I can't thank you enough for joining us all the way from Tel Aviv and enlightening us on these super crucial issues for the future of Israel, the United States, and truly humanity. It's always a pleasure having you on, and keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you, Shahar. Thank you always.
And to all of you, our viewers, we will continue to keep you updated as things move forward in Israel and across the world, for this battle has huge ramifications all across. This is why we're here, and this is our commitment to you and our mission at JBS. Thank you all for watching, and may we see better times soon. I'm Shahar Azani, and see you again.